Thank you everyone for attending this webinar session. This session will be recorded. The focus will be around a high-level demonstration of SureCloud's third-party risk management solution. So today, I'm joined with my colleague, Christian, to provide this webinar. So myself is Zheng. I'm a senior director here at SureCloud, primarily managing the customer success and pre-sales function. My role at SureCloud is to make sure that our customers receive a consistent experience as well as the expectations met across the entire customer lifecycle. One primary responsibility or focus area is making sure our existing customer, once they have any cultural change or business change, our solution is evolving with them to support their need. So prior to joining SureCloud, I used to work in Deloitte as well as IBM as a GRC SME, building various methodologies around risk and compliance, as well as solutions to aid different customers in different industries. I'll let Christian also to give a quick intro of himself.
Thank you, Yang. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian, and I am a solution advisor here at SureCloud. So I am on the pre-sales team, and I assist with the demonstrations, lead demonstrations, and provide any GRC advice and guidance with the SureCloud platform. Former to this, I was actually a senior implementations consultant at a different company, and I implemented a wide variety of different GRC solutions.
Thank you, Christian. So before we move on to the TPR solution, I'll give a quick intro of who we are. So SureCloud was founded in 2006. We are primarily based in the UK, but we also have an office in the US. As of today, we have about 500 plus customers across Europe, US, and Asia Pacific. That number is growing on a weekly basis. And apart from GRC solutions, we also offer cybersecurity services as well as risk advisory related services. And all of our products or software is cloud-based, and we're a SaaS company. So within the GRC practice, we primarily focuses on the following use cases around risk and compliance. That is not to say we can't implement any bespoke solution, but out of box, we have primarily these 6, which is third-party risk management or TPRM, IT risk management, that includes also cyber risk management. We have then a enterprise risk management. We also have a very comprehensive compliance management that looks into various aspects of different regulation a customer may comply against, ranging from ISO and NIST to the likes of SOX and also PCI. And then we have a data privacy management or GDPR solution, as some may call it. And then recently we've done a revamp on our audit management solution, mainly for internal audit, but it can be also used for external audit purposes, depending on what your external audit would prefer. So our solution is ready out of box for these 6 use cases, and it sits on the same platform. All the data is integrated with one another. We have reporting capabilities, workflow and automation is by default. And we try to make sure the experience is as similar as Microsoft Office 365, so that people don't feel like they're learning a new product. And again, my colleague Christian will show that in the tool shortly. So in terms of today's focus, we are just going to show our third-party risk management solution. So why do we need a solution in third-party risk management? Well, it allows us essentially to streamline the process we have in place around third-party risk identification, as well as help us reduce the risk related to using a third party. That is, vendors for supplying products or supplying services, as well as any partnership you may have for various reasons. And the value by having such a solution is, well, first of all, it helps the business centralize who their vendors are and understand, where their vendor's posture is. And on top of that, we're also able to capture the risk scoring through various assessments within the system, and that can be triggered automatically based on your preference and based on how we decide is the right tiering or the right risk rating of the customer. What the tool also allows you to do is the vendors themselves will have the ability to log into the exact same questionnaire that you sent out to them, so you can track it live, as well as they'll be completing it with the same look and feel that you're seeing it from your end. So all data, as well as all the activity in the journey, is captured within the tool with proper audit trail. And then finally, by having such a solution in place that links to the wider GRC remit, it allows us to, or allows the business to break down any kind of data silos and link any outcome, as well as any activities to the wider compliance or InfoSec requirements, and also understand the wider risk landscape when needed. So that is in a nutshell why and the value we bring with a third-party risk management solution. So before I move on to the demo bit, just one more thing to add is, out of box, we already have quite a few integrations available. If you're not seeing a specific tool or a specific solution that you want to integrate with the TPRM solution, we have a SureCloud integration hub based in the UK, which can provide an API built for you that allows you to integrate with any specific tool that's not listed in this diagram or in this slide. So before we move to the demo, the last thing I'll do is I have a preset question already that I want to send out as a poll to understand where your business is at in terms of how often you assess your third parties. So let me just launch that poll question. So feel free to start answering the question now or doing the demonstration. I will close this poll at the end of the demonstration. And then lastly, just a high-level overview of what we're going to about to demo before I hand over to Christian. So we're going to look at it from 4 aspects. One is, with a solution, how do we oversee all the information around my third parties in terms of risk, in terms of activity, in terms of who's doing what? And then also, how do I maintain my vendor register? How do I conduct a risk assessment against my third party? And finally is, well, I have different vendors in place doing different services. How do I manage the right questions I send out, as well as when I do send them out, how do I track them? So these are the 4 high-level points we're going to cover in the demo. At this point, I'll hand it over to Christian, my colleague, who's going to walk us through those 4 scenarios in the system.
All right. Get my screen shared here. One second, it's having a hard time finding the sharing button. Okay, is that coming through all right?
Yep, I'm able to see your screen.
All right, sounds good. So welcome to the SureCloud platform. Today we're going to be looking at the third-party risk management solution. More specifically, what we're looking at now is a third-party risk overview dashboard. I always like to start with the dashboarding and reporting capabilities so we can get a good overview of all the data that we're currently tracking in the system, as well as the different report types we can utilize and how that really eases with digesting that information and navigating to more specifically the areas that you'd like to see. Now, standardized across all of our solutions, we're going to provide you with a few different portlets at the top and reports as well. So at the top, we're going to have our intro and guidance. So that's just going to be some general text around what the dashboard is, how to utilize it. And since this is a free text field, we can really put anything in there to assist that end user and guide them on how to utilize these dashboards and reports. To the right of that, we're going to have our quick access navigation bar. And that's going to be just like a favorites page, if you will. So we can very easily go ahead and set specific areas that we'd like to navigate to that are relevant to the third-party risk management solution. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and favorite things like our organization register, maybe how we're going about tiering, the question library, and the assessments, but we can also do actions as well. So if we want to go ahead and have an action favor up there to create a new third party or kick off an assessment, we could certainly do that. Now going down, we'll look more specifically at some of the reports and some of the information we're tracking. So it's always important to be able to do simple counts. We can really just look at the information there, see how many high-risk third parties we have, how many assessments are in progress. Maybe we were looking at how many assessments are past due within a certain time period. We can be very flexible about these types of reports. On the top right, we can see that we have a pie chart there. So if we wanted to get a more holistic view of the third-party risk summary, we can go ahead and group on those different risk categories and then easily drill down into the next layer and see exactly which organizations have those associated risks. Going down a little further, we have a radial chart here. And what this is doing is breaking up those assessments into their categories. It's a little more granular, but more importantly, we're able to see exactly how much risk the organization is bringing on for each of these different areas. If we look at security governance, we can see that we have a little more risk. So we have 4 high risks there based on the assessments we've sent out. And it's a good way to plot out and digest that information just to see which areas may be bringing more risk at a lower level than just the assessment itself. To the right of that, we can also break it down by specific suppliers and see exactly how many assessments we sent out and then the associated risk for those assessments. It's important to be able to track the statuses too. So to the right of that, you can see we can do a simple bar chart and track exactly where the assessments are at as far as status is concerned. And the last few reports here are simple grids. So if we wanted to go ahead and just have a simple grid of all of the third-party assessments we've sent out, we can certainly do that, as well as filter on and search on that selection. So we can very easily navigate to where we would like to. Same can be said with the organization register. If we wanted to see a view of all the suppliers that we're currently tracking in a centralized report, we can do that, as well as bring over any of that associated information, such as maybe the description service, a bit site scores. If you have any integrations and you want to pull that information over, we can, of course, report on that. We can also track things such as the first registration date, any associated regulations, really any details we're tracking on that supplier. And the last report I want to cover here is the bit site report. So speaking of those integration capabilities, again, we're actually able to integrate with a bunch of different rating agencies. In this case, we're looking at BitSite, so we can report on information that we pulled over from BitSite and slice and dice that really however you would like to see that. Last thing I want to cover on the dashboarding and reporting is the ability to get data out of the system. So we can do that in a few different ways. At a high level, we can go ahead and copy this image. We can use that in PowerPoints, emails, messages, whatever the scenario is. But we can also download this into 3 different file formats: CSV, Excel, and PDF. And then we have a managed resource link. So if you use other reporting software, such as Tableau, Power BI, any other platforms that you use to report on that utilize managed resource links, that allows us to go ahead and generate a link and access the data within SureCloud live within those other reporting platforms. We can also do a scheduled export of these reports and dashboards. And that's a really powerful feature because that can allow us to really streamline and automate sending out these dashboards. So if you have a meeting, at the beginning of every month, you need to assess this information. You can go ahead and set the recipient list, decide on that frequency, and then begin drafting that email. The next thing I'm going to cover is the organization register. So it's going to be the centralized repository for all the suppliers that you want to track in the system. So using that quick access navigation, I can easily jump over to that. And it's a very simple form. So you can import into this, or you can do it row by row. If you just click on add row here, you can add one-off suppliers as well. But looking at some of the attributes here, we can assign it a unique identifier, we can assign it a name, and then we can do a short service description as well. To the right of that, we can jump into the details. We can also go ahead and track the statuses. So for any reason we need to put it into a pending or review state, we can certainly do that. Or if we need to go ahead and inactivate this vendor altogether, we can go ahead and visibly see that as well. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the SureCloud example. And that's going to bring us to the details for this supplier. So at the top, you're going to see unique identifier and name. And beneath that, we'll have a handful of high-level fields or details around the supplier, such as the contact information, URL, if there's any attachments or contracts that you'd like to attach to this details form. We can begin to categorize it in a few different ways. So the scope, of course, that status that we had just previously mentioned, and then we can get into the tiering. So the tiering source is going to allow us to decide exactly how we want to go about tiering our suppliers. So in this case, we decided to use an engagement survey. What that is it's a simple questionnaire that the internal supplier relationship owner will be able to fill out just regarding the type of services or product provided, the type of data they're going to have access to, just some high-level questions around those types of services. And then based on that, we can determine the tier. So is it going to be a trusted supplier? Is it going to be informal, a partner? Or, it doesn't have to be based on categories. We can just do tier 1, 2, 3, or 4. But what that's going to do is more importantly, allow us to be very granular about how we go about assessing our suppliers. So for those higher tier suppliers, maybe we want to go ahead and only have a handful of different questions. For the lower, maybe we want to ask them more questions. Whatever the scenario may be, we can very dynamically go about assessing our suppliers. Now, the last option for tiering source is utilizing the integration with BitSight. So maybe you want to base your tiering on that rating agency score to really streamline and automate that process. And that's something that we see quite often and can certainly do as well. So once we get into the tiering section, which we'll be looking at later, I'll show you how to go ahead and define those thresholds. Below that, we have our last review date, when it was first registered, any associated regulations. We can go ahead and attach any evidence as well. So any documents that are relevant to this supplier. We can flag whether or not they're GDPR relevant, and any comments as well. Going further down the page, we'll be able to see some location information. So we can track one of many different locations, as well as more specific information on that, such as the city, postal code, country, and region. And similar to that, we have our contacts. We can track contacts at the supplier, as well as the internal contacts that are responsible for the supplier as well. So we can track the role, name, we can categorize department, any contact information, and then same can be said with the internal relationship owners. And as you create these users within this table, that'll go ahead and create the users within the user table, and they'll be able to, of course, come into the platform and maintain the assessments if they're a recipient of one, or as the internal relationship owners review this information as needed. The next section is the BitSight section. So this is going to be that integration that we were speaking to. Now, it doesn't have to be BitSight, right? It can be any other rating agency or integration you'd like to work with. We're just using BitSight in this example to showcase those integration capabilities. So at the top, you'll see that the status is connected. So it's going ahead and pulling over all the information that BitSight has on this specific supplier. And you can utilize and report on that as needed. And then below that, we have our engagements and then any related information assets. So the engagements is going to allow you to do those engagement surveys and determine the tier, so we can go ahead and evaluate those suppliers and assess them with questions that are relevant. So in this case, we have an engagement survey over the GRC product and services. We can see the assessments, we can jump into that, the status, when it was last updated. So if for any reason the assessment's not getting completed as quickly as you would like, we can see exactly when it was last updated, maybe follow up on that if needed. And then if it's already been completed, of course, we'll have the date there as well as the tier. So if I were to jump into this assessment, we'll be able to see that internal assessment that the supplier relationship owner would fill out. So this is not an externally facing assessment yet. This is just determining that tier. So it's going to go over a few different questions and responses for the type of services, product being provided, the type of data that we're going to be handling. And then more importantly, once that's all said and done, that's going to roll up into that tier that we're looking at. And if we need to override that, we can certainly do that as well. But we determine the tier based on those questions and weights we assign in the library. That is the organization or supplier details repository. The next thing I'm going to look at is actually how to go about issuing out those assessments. And then after that, we'll look at how to draft those assessments and make changes to the questions within them. So using the breadcrumbs, I can easily navigate back to any step that I had previously been on. And then using the quick access navigation bar, I'll be able to jump to any of those areas. So we're going to go ahead and jump to the assessment tracker. And within the assessment tracker, we'll be able to see all those suppliers that we've been assessing. And we can reference those from the organization register. So it is an integrated solution. So those references are already going to be in place. So we can easily pre-populate this information. So in this case, when we select SureCloud, it's going to pull up with the relationship owners, third-party contacts, the tier, and then we can jump into the assessments. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and look at some of the other attributes we're tracking at this level. So within the last assessment results, we'll be able to see the current status for the most recent assessment. Similar to that last updated field for the details, we can see when the last time they updated that assessment was, as well as the associated max risk. We can also see how it's been trending over time. So if you've sent out multiple different assessments over information security, you can very easily see over time if that risk has been deteriorating or improving. We can track any follow-up actions off the back end of those assessments. And we can also track a bunch of different data information around the assessment as well. So when it was created, started, completed, if there was any remediation items and when those were finalized. And then lastly, we're providing you with a really easy way to go ahead and jump over to those exceptions and actions if we've raised any. So if I go ahead and jump into the SureCloud example here, we'll be able to see a handful of different assessment types. So first, you can choose any of the recipients that we've detailed within the supplier details in the organization register. We can then go ahead and choose that assessment type, which is defined within our questionnaire library. And then we can assign any reviewers. And this can be of one to many different recipients and reviewers as well. That's important to note. So it doesn't just have to be a single individual. To the right of that, we have our due date. So we can, of course, we're going to want to set a due date to make sure that's getting completed by a specific date. And then we can jump into the assessment itself. To the right of that, we have any users that we consulted and formed, so we can detail those as well for reporting. We can look at the assessment summary. So, whether or not it's been completed, if it's been canceled, if it's still pending. We can see when it was last updated. We can also see the current max risk and any remediation actions. And then for each of the assessments, we'll be able to see that date information as well. But it's really important to note here, but this is where the next assessment date is going to be decided. So based on that tier and the current risk score for the assessment that we're looking at, it's going to recalculate that next assessment date. And we can set those that cadence in the the tiers and the thresholds within the tiering table that we'll look at towards the end after the question library. So for this case, we're going to go ahead and jump into the information security assessment. And we'll be presented with a very simple workflow and form. At the top, we'll be able to see that it's first going to start with answering the questions. So when you choose your recipient and issue this out, they're of course going to be notified both in the platform and through email. They'll be provided with a link that they can utilize to jump right into SureCloud. And then from there, begin answering this assessment. Now, once they've gone about answering or responding to all these questions, they would first scroll down, review the summary. It's also important to note here that I am currently looking at this as an administrator or a reviewer. So some of these fields are going to be hidden, such as the risk fields, the max risk, and the risk column. We, of course, don't want the recipients to see how they're being scored. So those will not be visible to them. They will only see the categories, descriptions, and then questions themselves. As the recipient, I would click into each of these sections. I would be able to read the questions, provide those responses. If I have any questions or comments to add, as well as evidence, I can, of course, go ahead and add those. And then as the reviewer, I would be able to see these remedial actions, as well as the response risk sections. So if there's any actions after being submitted, I could review these question responses, flag any actions, and then send that back to them and have that back and forth communication to go ahead and remediate any of those issues. As the recipient, once everything is said and done, I provided all the evidence and worked out all those issues, completed all the questions. The next step is submitting it, going through that final review. And then as the reviewer, I can go ahead and close out the assessment. The next section down here is just an easy way to view those actions. So you don't have to click into every single individual section. You can very easily see all of the actions rolled up into a single view. But after that, once it all is said and done, the reviewer close out the assessment, and then you can go ahead and report on that as needed. So the next area we're going to look at is the question library, which is how the assessments are structured. So I can use those breadcrumbs again, and then jump right into that questionnaire library. So this is a very simple form as well. So you can import into this. So you can go ahead and initially load all of those questions in, or you can add them one off or make changes to the questions that you're currently already tracking. So it's first going to have that unique identifier or label. You can go ahead and define the question, any guidance to assist the end users that may be filling or responding to these questions. Then each question is going to be associated with a specific category, and then each category has an assessment type. So for data privacy, you're going to have many different categories, same with information security, and that's how you can sort of define those assessments by category all the way down to the question. You also have your tiers. So you can see that in this case, it's across all the different tiers, but you can go ahead and limit that down as well. So if they're a tier 4, or maybe they're trusted, they're only going to get the trusted questions. But if they are trusted, and this question has all the different tiers, and you'll very easily be able to see that all of the questions that are associated with that would also be sent out. To the right of that, we have the question type. So we have a few different response types. We can do yes, no's, free text. We can do custom selections as well. So if you want to define your own list, you can very easily do so. We can require questions. And then under response options, we can go ahead and associate this with controls and processes. So since SureCloud is an integrated solution, we of course can tie controls, processes within our compliance solution over to the question library as well. And then lastly, we have our settings area. So we can go ahead and choose whether or not evidence is required. We can say no evidence required. We can make it optional or mandatory. We can go ahead and define a weight. So we can go ahead and quantify that and roll it up into a numerical score. And then we can also go ahead and assign dependencies. So if we wanted to dynamically show and hide these questions based off specific responses, we can very easily do that as well. And then the last column here is the status. So if we wanted to go ahead and activate questions, put them into a pending or review state, or just completely decommission them and remove them from future assessments, we can very easily do that. And then the last area we're going to be looking at is that third-party tiering. So defining those tiers and then managing the reassessment dates. So within this simple table, you can see we can define the tiers. You can, do it tier 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can categorize it by different labels such as informal, trusted, partner, strategic. You can provide the descriptions there as well as color code them and assign a weight to those. After that, we also can see that we have our BitSite integration. So it doesn't have to be BitSite, as I mentioned earlier. It can be other, rating agencies as well. But we can define those thresholds for the information that's pulled over from BitSite. Based off of those thresholds, we'd be able to then categorize those tiers. And then after that, we have our reassessment. So we can define in months, based on the risk score for the assessment that we sent out, in the tier, how many months we need to go ahead and add on to that next reassessment date before sending out the next assessment. And that is how we go about assigning defining those third-party tiers. And that is to summarize the third-party risk management solution in SureCloud. I think I may have seen some questions coming in. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn it back over to you, Zheng, and we can start looking at those questions.
Thank you, Christian. Let me just share screen again. So before I answer the question, feel free to add any questions in the chat and we'll address it shortly. So first of all, I just want to stop the poll and let's have a look at the outcome. So I'll just share results as well with everyone. So it looks like the majority of people answered option 4, which depends on the third party's current risk posture. But we do have one individual that answered annually, biannually, as well as ad hoc. So ideally, in the perfect world, we want to know our supplies a bit better, so we don't have to apply the same amount of workload against all of them. Depends on how critical they are to our business. So on that note, if we have a tool or a guiding system that allows us to assess them by tiering as well as risk posture, it will make life easier so we can focus on the areas we need to allocate resources and manpower to. But if we prefer the manual way, again, it's not end of the world. We just need to start moving towards that better prioritization approach to free up resources when needed. So in terms of questions, we do have a few that came through, so I'll just go through them chronologically. Bear with me, I need to bring up the chat window first. Just move on to the next slide. So the first question came from Mehmet. It's a question around whether the suppliers or customer themselves can also manage or use this assurance process. So the specific scenario is his company is onboarding is assessing a customer, but the customer also have questions for them to assess. So the short answer is no. So from a tool perspective, we do not give the flexibility of managing the process or sending questionnaires back to ourselves, because there's a very real reason that they might have their own tool in place. And they have to trigger the questionnaire from their side of the tool, and they have a different method of getting into the tool for you to answer those questions. But obviously, if they're also a SureCloud customer, I don't see why that can't be done. And if they're a manual user, what we can allow them to do is give them the option of, when they're responding to your questionnaire, they can also attach any questionnaire set they have, either as a spreadsheet or as free text, and you can address them in the same place, so you have the audit trail of what you answered on your system. But realistically speaking, if they're a large vendor that also needs to assess yourselves, they typically have their own tool. So there's no point to replicate that process in our product. And from a security perspective, we want to minimize the amount of flexibility a vendor has on what they can do in our platform. So by opening up those features, you're essentially opening up potential risks of them being able to look at other features within the tool if control is not set properly, or if your admins start making changes to certain controls and omitted their access right. So the next question I have is from Yasmin. What determines the tiers for my supplier? Well, that is more a internal question to the methodology you have around your third-party risk management approach. Typically, what that is how you value or how you see the potential risk associated to that relationship. So a good example, if a supplier is only providing, let's see, monitors or stationary equipment for your office, they're typically not a high tier, because it doesn't consist of too much risk. But if they're supplying or they're managing your HR system or financial system, they would be considered as a strategic or a critical tiered customer, which means you need to pay more attention and get more out of the assurance and risk assessment process from them. The next question came from Jenny. How do I decide on the reassessment date for my suppliers? So again, that is based in our solutions based on the combination of tier as well as the current risk rating. That is the typical standard of how to automate that. But again, if you have other mechanisms, or you want to leverage, an external rating agency like BitSight or RiskRecon, you can apply that logic as well. Kind of the rule of thumb is you would want to have more frequent reassessment based on your internal policy on more critical vendors, and then have a minimum amount of reassessment for less risky or less significant vendors you may have in your vendor library. And the last question came from Yasmin again, is for assessments, how can I track engagement of my suppliers? I think from a tool perspective, that was addressed by Christian earlier, is that we timestamp all kind of activities we have in the tool. So from there, it'll determine on when things are closed previously, and based on the tiering and the risk rating, the system will be intuitive enough to decide on the next reassessment date, and let the senior relation manager or owner made aware that they need to review another questionnaire that's happening, let's say in 6 months' time or 9 months' time, depending on the reassessment logic. I think that's all the questions in the chat. I'll give it 10 seconds in case there's any more questions coming through. So, okay, I think that's all the questions. There's no new ones that came through. On that note, thank you so much for attending this call. My name is Yang, and my colleague, Christian, thank you so much for also being on this call. So if you want to reach out to us, here are some of our details, LinkedIn and email. And also, if you're interested in more SureCloud events, please visit our events page, which is www.surecloud.com/resources/events. Just as a heads up, we do have upcoming events this month as well as next month. So feel free to register those as well. Again, thank you so much for your time and wish you a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone.